10 years ago, I stood in the small, dimly lit apartment I had called home for the last few months. I was staring at my wedding suit, hanging neatly in the closet, pressed and ready. The fabric was immaculate, shining under the weak light, and everything about it screamed that I was ready for the biggest day of my life. The day I had been dreaming about for as long as I could remember, but that moment felt so far removed from where I was at that point in time. The wedding was supposed to be in just 6 days. Riverstone Hall, one of the most stunning wedding venues in Chicago, had been booked for months. It was Lily Hartman's choice. She had insisted on it, and I didn't argue because I loved her. The place was absolutely breathtaking. White stone walls, sparkling chandeliers, and a terrace overlooking the lake that looked like it belonged in a fairy tale. It was the kind of venue you booked if you had money that I didn't have. But at the time, I didn't let that stop me. I had a good job, a steady job. I had just received a promotion that made me feel like I was on top of the world. I believed, deep down, that our love could conquer all. It didn't matter if we didn't have the financial means to afford everything. What mattered was that we had each other. Or so I thought. I had worked hard to build the life I thought I wanted. I had a steady income. I had plans. And most importantly, I had Lily. We talked about the future endlessly. About kids, about the house we'd buy together, about the adventures we'd go on. Our lives were going to be perfect, at least that's what I thought. But then, just a few weeks before the wedding, my world came crashing down. I lost my job. Losing my job wasn't just a setback, it was a complete blow to my self-esteem. I had worked so hard to get to that point in my career, and it all came to a sudden halt. I couldn't believe it. It wasn't just about the money. It was about who I was. I had built my identity around my work. I thought if I had a steady income, I could offer Lily everything she wanted. But when that was taken away from me, I felt like I had nothing left. The job market wasn't kind to me after that. I sent out countless resumes, went on endless interviews, but nothing clicked. I was falling behind, and each rejection stung worse than the last. I even took on odd jobs, hoping to make ends meet, but it wasn't enough. The weight of financial pressure started to take a toll on me, on my mental health, on my confidence, on everything. Lily didn't understand. It wasn't her fault, but she didn't know how to handle it. She had always been independent, always used to getting what she wanted. She came from a wealthy family. Her father owned a successful company, and she was used to a lifestyle that was so far removed from mine, and I had always been the one who provided. But now, it felt like the tables were turning, and I wasn't prepared for that. She started to pull away, emotionally. At first, it was subtle, a few more quiet nights, a few less "I love you" texts, a little more silence between us. But then, one night, she said it, the words I wasn't prepared to hear. "I need someone who can take care of me," she said, her voice trembling. "Someone who has a future." I stood there, frozen. I didn't know what to say. How could I? The woman I had envisioned my life with was telling me that I wasn't enough, that I wasn't the person she needed. My heart broke in that moment. It felt like everything I had worked for, everything I had believed in, was being ripped away. I was no longer the person I used to be, and she could see that. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I can't do this anymore." And with that, Lily walked out of my life. She didn't just leave physically, she left emotionally too. It wasn't just the loss of a partner, it was the loss of my future. The future I had imagined. The dreams we had shared. For a long time, I didn't know what to do with myself. I had lost everything in a single moment, my job, my fiancé, my sense of self. I had no idea where to go from there. But as time went on, something started to change inside me. I realized that I couldn't just wallow in my self-pity. I couldn't let this define who I was. The first few months were rough. I tried to focus on my work, but my mind wasn't in it. I was still heartbroken, still wondering what went wrong. I went through the motions of life, but I wasn't living. I had to get myself back on track. I knew I had to rebuild my life. I didn't know how, but I knew I had to start somewhere. And that somewhere turned out to be starting over completely. I took on whatever jobs I could find. I networked like crazy, trying to get back into a job that would give me the sense of purpose I had lost. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't fast, but I slowly started to make progress. Then, after a couple of years, things began to change. I finally landed a steady job again. Not the job I had lost, but one that gave me a sense of security. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. More importantly, it gave me a sense of pride in myself that I had been lacking. But no matter how much I tried to focus on my career, a part of me kept wondering about Lily. What would have happened if I hadn't lost my job? Would we still be together? Could we have made it work? I thought about these questions all the time. But what I didn't know was that fate had something else in store for me. Fast forward to 10 years later. I was no longer that guy who had lost everything. I had rebuilt myself. I had grown stronger, smarter, and more resilient. And then, out of nowhere, I received an offer that would change everything. Lily's father, the man I had always respected, the man whose business had been the foundation of his family's wealth, was selling his company. It was a company I had watched grow over the years, admired from afar. But now, there was a chance to buy it. This wasn't just any company. This was a business that could be the key to everything I had worked for. The kind of opportunity you don't pass up. I didn't think twice. I knew I had to take this chance. I was going to prove to myself and to Lily that I had not only rebuilt my life, but that I could now stand on my own 2 feet. I was no longer the man who had lost everything. I was the man who was going to make it. But buying the company wasn't going to be easy. It was a complicated deal, and I had to work with a lot of people to make it happen. There were negotiations, legal documents, and all kinds of things to work through. But this was the opportunity I had been waiting for. I wasn't about to back down now. The one thing I wasn't ready for, though, was how Lily would react. Would she see me as someone who had finally made something of himself? Or would she see me as the man who had failed her all those years ago? I didn't know, but I was determined to find out. It felt surreal as I sat at the conference table, papers spread out in front of me. I had always imagined sitting in a room like this, running my own company, making decisions, and negotiating with the top players in the industry. But never in my wildest dreams did I think it would be Lily's father's company. It felt like fate had brought me here, but at the same time, it was overwhelming. This wasn't just about business, it was personal. The company had been a staple in the industry for decades, known for its innovation and success. Lily's father had built it from the ground up. He was a self-made man, someone I had always admired, even back when I was dating Lily. I remembered how proud she was of her father's achievements, how she would light up when talking about the company and the future it promised. But now, things had changed. The company was for sale, and I had the opportunity to buy it. But that opportunity came with its own set of challenges. The sale wasn't just about signing a few papers, it was a complex process. There were multiple investors involved, and the price was steep. It wasn't going to be easy. I had to prove I was capable, not just financially, but professionally. This was the ultimate test, and I knew I had to pass it. If I wanted to make something of myself, to show Lily that I had truly changed, this was my chance to do it. The negotiations took weeks. It was a back-and-forth process filled with tense meetings and phone calls. I had to learn everything I could about the company's financials, its market position, and its future projections. I wasn't just buying a company, I was buying a legacy, one that carried a lot of weight. And if I was going to run it successfully, I needed to be prepared. I hired experts to guide me through the legal and financial aspects, but there were still moments where I had to step up and make decisions on my own. It wasn't easy, and there were times when I doubted myself. What if I wasn't ready for this? What if I failed again? But then, I remembered the moment when Lily walked out on me. I remembered how she looked at me as if I was just another failure. That feeling had haunted me for years, and I refused to let it define me any longer. I had worked too hard to get to this point. I wasn't going to let fear stop me now. As the negotiations progressed, I started to gain more confidence. I made a few key moves that surprised even the investors. Slowly but surely, I started to carve out a position for myself in the business world. It wasn't just about buying a company, it was about proving to myself and everyone else that I was capable, that I wasn't the same person I had been 10 years ago. Then came the day I had been waiting for, the day the deal was finalized. It wasn't a huge celebration. It was quiet, subdued. There were no fireworks or champagne popping, just a simple handshake and a few words exchanged. But in that moment, I realized how much I had accomplished. I had bought the company, I had secured my future, and I had done it on my own terms. But there was still one thing I had to do. I hadn't told Lily about the deal. I had kept it a secret, not out of spite, but because I wanted it to be a surprise. I wanted to show her that I had made it, that I had become the man she had once believed in. It wasn't just about the money or the company, it was about showing her that I could succeed, that I could be the person she had once hoped I would become. The idea of seeing her again after all these years filled me with a mix of excitement and anxiety. I hadn't seen her since she walked out of my life, and I wasn't sure how she would react. Would she be proud of me? Would she think I had finally made something of myself? Or would she simply see it as too little, too late? I didn't know what to expect. All I knew was that I had worked hard to get to this point, and now it was time to face the past. A few days after the deal was finalized, I made the decision to reach out to Lily. I didn't know how to begin the conversation, so I kept it simple. I called her and asked if she wanted to meet. It had been years since we last spoke, and I wasn't sure if she would even want to see me. But, to my surprise, she agreed. We met at a quiet cafe in the city, the kind of place that held no memories for us, no history. It was just a neutral spot, perfect for an uncomfortable reunion. When I saw her, I could hardly believe how much time had passed. She looked the same, but there was something different about her too. She seemed more confident, more assured. It was clear she had moved on with her life, just like I had. But when she saw me, there was a flicker of something in her eyes, a recognition, a surprise, maybe even a little regret. "Hey," I said, sitting down across from her. "It's been a while." "Yeah," she replied, her voice steady but guarded. "A long while." We talked for a while about the small stuff, the weather, how life had been for us over the years. But eventually, the conversation turned to the real reason I had reached out. "I bought the company," I said, getting straight to the point. Her eyebrows shot up in surprise. "You what?" "I bought it. Your father's company. I'm the new owner." For a moment, she was silent, processing what I had just told her. I watched her closely, waiting for her reaction. I wasn't sure what I expected, but I knew I needed to hear her thoughts. "That's impressive," she said finally, her tone softening. "I didn't expect that." "I didn't expect it either," I replied with a small smile. "But it's mine now, and I've worked hard for it." There was a long pause as Lily looked at me. I could tell she was trying to make sense of everything. This wasn't the reunion either of us had planned. It was awkward, uncertain. But it was a start. "I'm proud of you," she said, her voice quieter this time. "I always knew you had it in you." And in that moment, I realized that maybe, just maybe, this was the closure I had been looking for all these years. We weren't going to pick up where we left off, but we had both grown. We had both moved forward, and that was enough. After that meeting, things with Lily remained somewhat distant. She had acknowledged my success, and I appreciated her words, but there was still a wall between us. It wasn't the same as it used to be, and I knew it never would be. Our lives had moved in different directions, and even though I had rebuilt myself, some things couldn't be repaired. But the truth was, I wasn't seeking her approval anymore. What mattered now was that I had proven something to myself, something that had been weighing me down for years. The company I had acquired wasn't just a business, it was the result of a decade of struggle, of climbing out of the hole I had been buried in. And as I sat in my new office, overlooking the bustling city, I realized how far I had come. The view was a constant reminder that life had its ups and downs, but you could still rise above it all if you had the will to keep going. Running the company was no easy task. There were new challenges every day, and some of them seemed insurmountable. But I tackled each problem with a focus that surprised even me. I had been through the worst, and now I was ready for anything. I put in long hours, learned everything I could about the business, and surrounded myself with a team that I could trust. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. Over the next few months, I began to make strides. The company's performance improved, and I started to see the results of all my hard work. I made some bold decisions, investing in new technology, expanding into new markets, and bit by bit, the company started to grow. It felt good to see the numbers rise, to know that I was making the right moves. But success wasn't the only thing that was on my mind. I had often wondered what would have happened if I hadn't lost my job that day, if Lily and I had been able to continue down the path we had once envisioned together. But those thoughts were fleeting now. The reality was, our lives had gone in different directions, and I had to accept that. But there was one thing I couldn't deny. I wanted closure. I wanted to know that what we had was real, and that I wasn't just a chapter in her past. It wasn't long before I heard from Lily again. This time, it wasn't a casual meeting. She asked if we could have dinner. I was taken aback at first, after all. It had been years since we had talked like this. But I agreed, curious to see where the conversation would go. I wasn't sure if she wanted to reconnect, or if this was just a courtesy meeting. Either way, I was ready for whatever came next. We met at a quiet restaurant downtown, a place that was more intimate than the cafe we had last seen each other in. Lily looked different, more confident, more comfortable in her own skin. There was a maturity about her now that wasn't there before, and I couldn't help but admire the woman she had become. "Thank you for meeting me," she said as she sat down across from me. "I've been thinking a lot about you and everything that happened." I nodded, feeling a slight tension in the air. "Yeah, me too. It's been a long time." We ordered drinks, and as the night went on, we talked about everything, our past, what we had been through, the years apart. It wasn't an easy conversation. There was still some hurt between us, but there was also understanding. It was clear that neither of us had forgotten what we once had, but we had both moved on, and that was something we needed to accept. "I never wanted to hurt you," she said, her voice quieter than usual. "When I left, I didn't know what else to do. I didn't know how to handle the situation. I thought I needed someone who had their life together, someone who could take care of me." I looked at her, surprised by her honesty. "I get it. You wanted security, and I couldn't give that to you at the time. I wasn't the man I am now, but I'm not angry anymore. I think we both made choices we thought were best for us." Lily smiled softly, her eyes filled with a mixture of regret and acceptance. "I think we both grew from it, and I'm sorry for how everything ended." "You don't need to apologize," I replied. "We were both just doing what we thought was right. We're different people now, and I think we both needed that time apart to become who we are." The conversation drifted to lighter topics, what we had been doing in the years since, how our lives had taken shape. But beneath the surface, there was still something unspoken between us, a quiet understanding that, even if we couldn't go back to what we once had, there was no animosity. We had both moved on, and we had both learned something from the past. As the night drew to a close, we walked out of the restaurant together, lingering in the cool evening air. It felt like the weight of the past had been lifted. Even if just a little, we had closure. We had peace. "I'm glad we talked," she said as we reached the sidewalk. "I hope you find happiness, truly." "You too, Lily," I said, shaking her hand. "I hope everything works out for you." She smiled, and with that, we parted ways for the final time. This marked the end of our chapter, but not the end of our stories. Both of us had gone on to find success in our own ways. I had my company, my future, and my peace. She had her own path to follow, and we were okay with that. As the months passed, things began to settle into a new rhythm. My business was growing steadily, and I found myself managing the company more confidently. I had the right people in place, and I was learning to trust them and let go of the reins in areas where I wasn't an expert. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine, and that meant everything. But just when things seemed to be moving smoothly, an unexpected challenge arose. One afternoon, I received a phone call that made my heart race. It was from a law firm, and they were representing a group of former employees from the company. The message was clear. There were accusations of mismanagement and financial irregularities from when Lily's father had been in charge. I froze for a moment, trying to process what I was hearing. This wasn't just some small issue, it was a full-blown legal challenge that could threaten everything I had worked for. The last thing I needed was a scandal, especially one tied to Lily's father's legacy. The lawyer on the other end of the phone explained that several employees had filed complaints about unpaid overtime, breach of contract, and even allegations of improper handling of retirement funds. It was a nightmare, a mess I hadn't anticipated. I knew that these weren't accusations to take lightly. Even though Lily's father was no longer running the company, the shadow of his leadership still hung over everything. His decisions, his actions, whether good or bad, were now my responsibility. And if this lawsuit went public, it would tarnish the company's reputation. Worse, it could lead to serious financial losses. I immediately called a meeting with my legal and finance teams to assess the situation. The lawyers assured me that we could fight the case in court, but it would be expensive, time-consuming, and unpredictable. There was no guarantee of winning, especially considering the evidence the plaintiffs had gathered. It was a risk I didn't want to take, but I didn't have much of a choice. This could destroy everything I had built. I spent the next few days poring over the company's financial records, trying to uncover any discrepancies that might have been overlooked. I knew that I couldn't just rely on legal teams to fix this for me. I had to get involved, to understand the full scope of the problem. The more I dug, the more I realized how much of a mess Lily's father had left behind. There were gaps in the accounting, incomplete records, and numerous questionable decisions. It wasn't intentional malfeasance, but it was sloppy management that had left the company vulnerable. But I wasn't about to let this be the end of the road for me. I had worked too hard, had come too far, to let this lawsuit ruin everything. I called in a trusted consultant to help me sort through the mess and fix the financial discrepancies. It wasn't an easy process, and I had to make some tough decisions, but I knew it had to be done. Throughout the ordeal, I found myself thinking about Lily again, not in the sense of wanting to be with her, but in wondering how she would react to this mess. Would she have known about it? Would she have had any idea of the mismanagement that had been going on behind the scenes? It was hard to imagine her father, someone she had always looked up to, being responsible for something so careless. But the reality was, it didn't matter. This was now my problem, and I had to face it head-on. I decided to take a proactive approach. I reached out to the employees who had filed the complaints, offering to meet with them and discuss the issues face-to-face. It wasn't an easy conversation, but it was the only way to show them that I was taking their concerns seriously. I wasn't going to hide behind lawyers or ignore the problem. I wanted to fix it, not just for the company, but for the people who had given their time and effort to it. The meetings went better than I expected. Many of the employees were shocked to hear how much I was willing to work with them to resolve the issues. They were used to a more distant, authoritarian management style, something that had been prevalent under Lily's father. But I wasn't like that. I wasn't just here to collect a paycheck. I was here to build something lasting. I worked with the legal team to put together a settlement that would satisfy the employees while avoiding a long, drawn-out court battle. It wasn't cheap, but it was the best option. Over the course of several weeks, we negotiated a deal that would compensate the employees and provide them with the benefits they were entitled to. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was the right one. And after everything was said and done, I was able to breathe a little easier. The lawsuit had been resolved, and the company could move forward. It wasn't the smoothest road, but it was one that led to a stronger foundation for the future. But even with the legal battles behind me, I still couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to prove myself even further. I had rebuilt my career, rebuilt the company, but there was something still missing. I had shown myself that I could succeed on my own, but now I needed to show the world, especially Lily, that I wasn't just the man who had lost everything. I was the man who had rebuilt it. I continued to work tirelessly, ensuring that the company was on track and that we could continue growing. The challenges didn't stop there, but each obstacle I overcame only made me more determined. This was my story, and it was one of redemption. I knew that this chapter wasn't over yet. There were still more challenges ahead, but for the first time in a long time, I was ready for them. I had learned so much, not just about business, but about myself. And no matter what came next, I was confident that I could handle it. As the company continued to thrive, I couldn't help but notice how much my life had changed. The struggles of the past had shaped me, taught me lessons I would carry with me forever. But even with all the success I had achieved, there were still moments when I felt like something was missing. Despite everything I had built, I couldn't ignore the lingering thoughts about Lily. I tried to push those thoughts aside, focusing instead on the company and its growth. Every decision I made, every challenge I faced, was about making sure the company's future was secure. I had proven to myself that I could handle anything that came my way. But there was still an emotional piece I couldn't ignore. One afternoon, as I sat in my office overlooking the city, the door to my office opened, and in walked someone I hadn't expected to see again. It was Lily. My heart skipped a beat. I hadn't heard from her since our dinner months ago, and now here she was, standing in front of me. She looked different, more mature, more confident, yet there was a sadness in her eyes that I couldn't quite place. She stood there for a moment, looking at me as if trying to gauge how much I had changed. "Hi," she said softly, her voice carrying a mix of uncertainty and hesitation. "I know it's been a while. I hope I'm not interrupting." I swallowed hard, surprised by her sudden appearance. "No, not at all. What's going on? What brings you here?" She smiled faintly, but there was something behind her smile that told me this wasn't a casual visit. This was something more. "I've been thinking a lot about everything," she began, her eyes drifting to the window. "About the past, about the decisions we both made, and I just wanted to talk." I nodded, gesturing for her to take a seat. "Of course, let's talk." She sat down across from me, her posture tense, as if unsure of how to approach the conversation. For a few moments, neither of us said anything. It was as if we were both waiting for the other to say the first thing that would set the tone for the conversation. "I've been doing a lot of soul-searching," Lily finally spoke, her eyes meeting mine, "and I realized that I left without really understanding everything. I never took the time to truly listen to you or to understand your side of things." I was taken aback by her words. I hadn't expected an apology, let alone this level of self-reflection. "Lily, you don't owe me anything. We both made mistakes back then." She shook her head, as if disagreeing with me. "No, I did owe you something. I didn't give you the chance to prove who you really were. I didn't give you the chance to show me that you could do it. And now, looking back, I see how wrong I was." Her words hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't just the apology, it was the realization that she had been carrying the weight of that decision too. She had left, thinking that I couldn't offer her the life she wanted, but now she understood that it wasn't about that. It was about trust, about believing in someone when things got hard. "I was scared," she continued, her voice trembling slightly. "I wanted security. I wanted stability. And when things got tough, I panicked. I thought I needed someone who could give me that, and I didn't see that you were already doing everything you could. I left because I was afraid. But now, I see that I was wrong. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to hold on to the anger I had felt all those years ago, the feeling of betrayal, of abandonment. But another part of me understood what she was saying. She had been scared too. We had both been navigating through our own fears, our own insecurities. I didn't expect this, I finally said, my voice a little hoarse. I didn't think you'd ever come back to talk about it. After everything, I thought we had both moved on. She nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. I thought so too. But sometimes, moving on doesn't mean you forget. It just means you learn to live with it. And I don't want to live with the regret of not understanding you better. There was a long silence between us as I processed her words. I wasn't sure if this was an attempt to rekindle something between us, or if it was just a conversation for closure. Either way, I knew that I had come to a place in my life where I could let go of the past. I had moved forward, rebuilt everything, and now, I was the person I had always wanted to be. I appreciate you saying that, I said finally. I really do. But I think we both know that we can't go back. We've both changed. We've both had to grow. She nodded, wiping away a tear. I know. I don't want to go back either. I just needed to say this, for myself, and for you. There was something profoundly healing in that moment. We weren't going to get back together. We weren't going to be the people we once were. But we were able to acknowledge our past, our mistakes, and the ways in which we had both grown. And that was enough. I'm glad you came by, I said, my voice steady now. I think it's time we both let go of the past and just move forward with our lives. She smiled softly, her eyes brightening. I agree. We sat in silence for a while, not needing to fill the space with words. There was peace in that silence, in knowing that we had both come to terms with everything. It wasn't easy. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and sometimes that's all you can ask for. Before she left, Lily turned to me one last time. I'm really proud of everything you've accomplished. You've done more than I could have ever imagined. Thank you, I said, my voice warm with gratitude. I guess we both found our own paths, didn't we? She nodded. Yeah, we did. And with that, she left. But this time, there was no lingering sadness. There was only the quiet satisfaction of knowing that we had both done the hard work to heal. It was over. And it was okay. After Lily left, I felt a sense of calm I hadn't expected. It wasn't closure in the traditional sense, but it was something deeper, a peaceful acceptance of the past and the choices we had made. It wasn't about fixing things or rewriting history. It was simply about acknowledging what had happened and accepting that it was okay. As the days passed, I found myself reflecting on everything that had led me to this point. The company, my personal growth, and now this unexpected conversation with Lily, everything had contributed to the person I had become. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was thriving. But that doesn't mean the challenges stopped. Running the company was a daily task, and with growth came new obstacles. There were still issues to address, decisions to make, and competition to face. But for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was fighting against the world. I felt like I was finally in control. One of the challenges I faced was bringing the company into a new era. We had been successful in the traditional markets, but the world was changing. Technology, consumer preferences, and industry standards were evolving, and I knew that in order to stay ahead, we had to adapt. I started focusing on innovation, pushing the team to think outside the box. We implemented new technologies, streamlined processes, and began looking at sustainable business practices. It wasn't just about profits anymore. It was about creating something that could endure, something that would leave a legacy. I wanted the company to be more than just a business. I wanted it to be a symbol of resilience and forward thinking. It wasn't easy. There were setbacks. Not everyone on the team agreed with the changes I was pushing for. Some of the older employees were resistant to new methods, and it took time to get everyone on the same page. But I knew that growth required discomfort. If we wanted to stay relevant, we had to evolve, and that meant making some tough decisions. The hardest part was convincing some of the senior leadership that change wasn't just a good idea, it was necessary. I had to challenge long-held beliefs and make people uncomfortable in order to show them the potential for growth. It wasn't always smooth, and there were moments of frustration, but slowly, the tide began to turn. The breakthrough came when we launched a new product line that incorporated the latest technology. It wasn't a perfect launch, but the response from customers was overwhelmingly positive. We had managed to tap into a new market, and it felt like a validation of everything we had been working towards. As I stood in the office late one evening, reviewing the sales numbers and customer feedback, I felt a sense of accomplishment I hadn't known in a long time. It wasn't just about the numbers, it was about the direction we were heading. I had created something that would last, and that, more than anything, gave me peace. It was around this time that I began to think about the future again. Not just the company's future, but my own. I had spent so many years focused on rebuilding, on proving myself. Now that I had achieved success in so many areas, I began to wonder what would come next. Was there more I could do? More I could contribute? Or had I already reached my peak? I didn't have the answers right away, but I knew I wanted to make a difference beyond just the business world. I had spent so much time proving my worth, but now I wanted to use my success to help others. I began looking into ways to give back through mentorship, charitable donations, and using my platform to elevate others. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that true success wasn't just about building a company, it was about building a legacy of impact. I had come so far, and now it was time to share what I had learned with those who could benefit from it. The first step was setting up a mentorship program for aspiring entrepreneurs. I wanted to give young professionals the opportunity to learn from someone who had been through the struggles and the triumphs. I wanted to provide guidance, support, and inspiration for those who were starting from scratch, just like I had. I began traveling to local universities and community centers, speaking to students about business, failure, and perseverance. It wasn't always easy to speak publicly, but it felt incredibly rewarding. I saw myself in so many of the people I spoke to, their hunger for success, their drive to prove themselves, their desire to make a difference. I wanted to show them that it was possible to start from nothing and build something meaningful. Over time, the mentorship program grew, and I started to see the impact it was having. Some of the people I mentored went on to launch their own businesses, while others found success in their careers. It wasn't just about giving advice, it was about showing them that they could believe in themselves, even when the odds seemed stacked against them. It was about creating a ripple effect, one that could inspire others to keep going, no matter the challenges they faced. But even as I began to focus on giving back, I never lost sight of the company. I continued to work on new initiatives, pushing the business further into the future. It wasn't about resting on my laurels. I had learned that success wasn't just a destination, it was a journey. And the journey was far from over. As I looked at everything I had accomplished, I realized that the person I had become wasn't defined by the failures of the past, nor was it defined by the success of the present. It was defined by the lessons I had learned along the way. The resilience, the determination, the ability to keep moving forward no matter the obstacles. I wasn't the same person I had been 10 years ago. I had grown, I had learned, and I had transformed into someone who could face whatever challenges life threw at me. But what mattered most was that I was no longer trying to prove myself to anyone else. I was doing it for me. And that, in the end, was the greatest success of all. A few years had passed since I had fully embraced the new direction for both the company and my life. The business was thriving, and with every milestone reached, I felt a deeper sense of satisfaction not just from the success, but from the journey. I had learned that true fulfillment didn't come from wealth or accolades, but from the ability to keep growing, adapting, and giving back. One afternoon, as I was reviewing the quarterly reports in my office, I received an unexpected email. It was from Lily. The subject line simply read, "I'd like to meet again." My heart skipped a beat. I hadn't heard from her in months, and while our last conversation had ended on good terms, I wasn't sure what to expect. Would it be another conversation about the past? Or perhaps she wanted something more. I debated for a few minutes whether to respond, but then decided to just go for it. Life had changed so much since the last time we met. The man I had been back then was gone. I had rebuilt myself and moved forward, and I felt confident that whatever came next, I could handle it. I replied, agreeing to meet her at a cafe near the lake. It was a neutral spot, one where we could both feel comfortable without the weight of history looming over us. It had been so long since I had seen her face to face, and a strange mix of anticipation and curiosity settled in my chest. When I arrived at the cafe, I spotted Lily sitting by the window, looking out at the water. She hadn't changed much, still the same bright eyes, the same confident posture. But there was a quiet maturity about her now, a calm that reflected the changes she, too, had undergone over the years. "Hey," I said, offering a smile as I walked over to the table. "Hi," she responded, her smile soft and sincere. "I wasn't sure if you'd come." "Of course I came," I said, taking a seat across from her. "What's going on?" She took a deep breath, as if gathering her thoughts. "I've been thinking about a lot of things, and I realized there's something I need to tell you." I raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" "I've been watching your journey from afar," she said, her voice steady, "and I've been so proud of everything you've achieved. I know I was the one who walked away, and I regret that more than I can say. But seeing you build something from nothing, seeing how far you've come, it's honestly inspiring." Her words hit me harder than I expected. I had spent so many years trying to prove to myself that I could make it on my own, that I didn't need anyone else's validation. And here she was, acknowledging that I had done it. She had watched me from a distance, and somehow that felt like an unexpected form of closure. "I appreciate that," I said, trying to keep my emotions in check. "It wasn't easy, but I think we both know that it had to happen the way it did." "In was redder." She nodded, her gaze softening. "You're right. And I think I finally understand why it had to happen that way. We both needed to grow, to learn from our mistakes, and I think, looking back, it was the only way we would have been able to truly move forward." We sat in silence for a moment, just letting the conversation settle between us. There was no tension, no awkwardness, just two people who had come to terms with their past and were now ready to look ahead. "I've been wanting to say this for a long time," Lily continued, her voice quieter now. "I'm sorry for how things ended between us. I didn't give you the chance to prove who you were, and I didn't give us a chance. But I think, for the first time in a long time, I understand. You weren't just the person I thought you were, neither of us were. We both had to become who we are now." I nodded slowly, feeling the weight of her words. It wasn't easy for either of us, but in the end, I think we both got what we needed. I'm not the person I was then, and neither are you. And that's okay. She smiled softly. "I agree." We spent the next hour talking about life, about what had happened since we last saw each other. We both had our own stories to tell, our own journeys. I had built a successful business, found fulfillment in mentoring others, and made peace with my past. Lily, on the other hand, had moved forward in her own way, continuing her career and traveling the world. It was clear that we had both learned from our experiences, and we had both found our own paths. When it was time to leave, I felt a sense of calm I hadn't expected. This wasn't a reunion in the sense that we were going to pick up where we left off. We were different people now, and we both understood that. But there was a sense of mutual respect, a quiet understanding that, in the end, everything had happened for a reason. "Take care of yourself," Lily said, standing up to leave. "You too," I replied, offering a genuine smile. "I wish you the best. Watch. And crew." She nodded, and with that, she walked out of my life again. But this time, there was no sadness. There was no feeling of being incomplete. There was only a sense of peace, a recognition that both of us had healed and moved forward. As I walked back to my car, I couldn't help but smile. Life had a funny way of working things out. Sometimes you had to go through the hardest moments to get to the best ones, and sometimes closure didn't come in the way you expected, but in the quiet understanding that you had both grown. I had come full circle. The person I had been 10 years ago was no longer the person I was today, and that was something worth celebrating. The months following my meeting with Lily felt like a turning point, not just in my personal life, but in the way I approached everything. I had always believed that success was about proving myself to others, showing that I was capable of handling whatever came my way. But as I reflected on the past, I realized that true success wasn't about what others thought it was, about growth, resilience, and, above all, the ability to embrace change. After the final meeting with Lily, I threw myself even more into the company. The drive to make something meaningful was no longer tied to proving my worth to anyone. It was a reflection of the journey I had taken to get here. With that newfound clarity, I began rethinking my long-term goals, not just for the business, but for myself. I knew I wanted to make a more significant impact on the world around me. I had spent years building my career from the ground up, but now it was time to focus on what really mattered. I started looking into charitable organizations, community projects, and ways to give back to the people who had supported me over the years. One of the first steps I took was partnering with local nonprofits to create a mentorship program for underprivileged youth. I remembered how hard it was when I was starting out, unsure of where to turn or who to ask for help. The idea was simple: offer young people the guidance and resources I never had, to give them the opportunities they deserved. The response was overwhelmingly positive. Young people were eager to learn, and I could see their enthusiasm in every meeting. I spoke to them about resilience, about the importance of perseverance in the face of adversity, and about never giving up, no matter how many setbacks you face. I was surprised by how much they looked up to me. To them, I wasn't just some guy who had made it big. I was someone who had been where they were and had come out the other side. I had been hesitant at first, wondering if I was truly qualified to mentor others. But as I spoke to the students, I realized that my experiences, good and bad, had given me the tools to help others. I didn't have all the answers, but I knew what it was like to fail, to struggle, and to fight for a second chance. And that was enough. One day, while sitting in a community center surrounded by eager faces, I thought about the lessons I had learned over the years. Every failure, every challenge, every heartbreak, those were the moments that had shaped me into the person I was today. I had come to understand that success was not about avoiding failure, but about embracing it, learning from it, and using it to push forward. As the mentorship program gained momentum, I began to feel like I was making a real difference. But it wasn't just the students who were benefiting, it was me too. Giving back reminded me of why I had started this journey in the first place. It was never about money or status. It was about creating something that could help others, something that could leave a lasting legacy. At the same time, I continued to push the company forward. We had expanded into new markets, developed new products, and implemented innovative technologies. It felt like we were on the cusp of something big. But now, there was a shift in my focus. I wasn't just concerned with profits or growth. I was focused on building a sustainable business, one that could stand the test of time. I wanted to create a company that would not only thrive financially, but also contribute positively to society. There were some moments when I doubted myself. The weight of responsibility was heavy, and sometimes it felt like I was juggling too many things at once. But whenever I got overwhelmed, I reminded myself of why I was doing all of this. It was for the future, not just mine, but the future of the people I was mentoring, the people I was helping, and the legacy I wanted to leave behind. One afternoon, as I sat in my office looking out at the skyline, I realized that everything had come full circle. The man who had once struggled to find his footing, the man who had been abandoned by the woman he thought he'd marry, was now someone who was building something far greater than any material success could offer. The past no longer defined me. It had shaped me, yes, but it was no longer a weight I carried around. I had embraced it, learned from it, and used it to fuel my journey forward. And in doing so, I had created a future that was full of possibility, one that was rooted in purpose and guided by a desire to make a difference. I had learned that life wasn't about waiting for the perfect moment, the perfect circumstances, or the perfect person. It was about taking risks, making mistakes, and finding the strength to keep going. It was about resilience, and most importantly, it was about understanding that the journey itself was as important as the destination. As I stood up from my desk and looked at the team working in the next room, I realized something important. The work I was doing now wasn't just about building a business. It was about building a community. And in that community, there was a shared purpose, a shared vision, and a shared belief in the power of perseverance. I wasn't just creating a legacy for myself. I was creating a legacy for the people who had helped me along the way and for the people I would continue to help in the future. And in doing that, I knew I had finally found the true meaning of success. As the company grew, so did my sense of responsibility. It wasn't just about the products we created or the markets we conquered anymore. It wasn't just about the financial success or the awards we won. It was about the lives we impacted, the employees, the community, the students in my mentorship program, and even the people I had once lost. I had built something that was more than just a business. I had built a network of people who believed in the mission, who believed in the journey, and who believed in the idea that resilience and growth were the cornerstones of success. And with every step we took, I could see that we were making a difference. As part of my commitment to giving back, I started a scholarship fund to help young entrepreneurs who lacked the resources to get their ideas off the ground. I knew how difficult it could be to get started with nothing, no connections, no capital, no guidance. I had been there, and I wanted to offer others the chance I never had. The scholarship fund was my way of paying it forward. It wasn't about the fame or the recognition. It was about creating opportunities for people who were hungry for success but didn't have the means to pursue it. We launched the first round of scholarships, and I remember the pride I felt as we saw the students take those first steps toward building their futures. They reminded me of who I had been, the person with big dreams but little direction. In many ways, they were the reflection of my past self, and I saw the potential in them. I watched them grow, saw them pitch their ideas, and even helped them refine their business plans. It was fulfilling in ways I hadn't imagined. There was something incredibly rewarding about giving someone the tools to make their own dreams a reality. But as the years went on, I started to think about my own personal life. I had dedicated so much time to building the company, helping others, and giving back that I hadn't truly focused on my own happiness. I had learned that success wasn't just about what you could achieve, it was also about who you had beside you along the way. For the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to think about love again. I realized that while I had achieved a lot professionally, I had left little room for the personal connections that truly matter. I had been so focused on proving myself to the world that I had neglected the importance of being present for the people who truly mattered. That was when I met someone unexpected, Sarah. She was smart, driven, and shared many of the same values I did. It wasn't love at first sight, but there was a deep connection right from the start. We shared a passion for helping others and a belief in the power of perseverance. Slowly, as we spent more time together, I realized that this was what I had been missing. A partnership that wasn't just about business or success, but about building a future together. Sarah wasn't impressed by my accomplishments or the success of the company. In fact, she didn't care about any of that. What mattered to her was the person I had become, the resilience, the compassion, the desire to make a difference. It was refreshing. She didn't want anything from me except for me to be myself, and for the first time in years, I allowed myself to be vulnerable. As we grew closer, I realized that this was the relationship I had been waiting for. It wasn't about finding someone to fill the gaps in my life or to validate my worth. It was about finding someone who saw me for who I was, someone who could stand beside me as an equal, as a partner, in both life and love. I had learned over the years that true strength came from allowing yourself to be open to others, I had spent so much time trying to prove my worth that I had closed myself off to the people who could truly make a difference in my life. But now, I was learning that strength wasn't about doing everything alone. It was about surrounding yourself with people who supported you and who you could support in return. The more I spent time with Sarah, the more I realized how much I had grown. The man I had been when Lily walked out on me all those years ago was a far cry from the man I had become, and, in many ways, Sarah represented the kind of relationship I had been searching for, one based on mutual respect, trust, and a shared vision for the future. As our relationship blossomed, I began to think about my legacy, not just in terms of the company or the charity work I had done, but in terms of the people I had impacted. I wanted to leave behind a legacy that wasn't just about business achievements, but about the lives I had touched. I wanted to be remembered as someone who had truly made a difference. But I also realized that a legacy wasn't something you could plan, it was something you built every day through your actions, your relationships, and your choices. And, as I looked at the life I was building with Sarah, I realized that the most important legacy I could leave behind was one of love, kindness, and resilience. The company would continue to grow, the mentorship programs would expand, and the scholarship fund would help countless young entrepreneurs. But my personal legacy, the impact I had on the people around me, was something far more valuable. I had learned that success wasn't just about achieving great things. It was about making the world a little better for the people you cared about. And now, with Sarah by my side, I knew that I was ready to build a future based on that very principle. As I looked ahead, I realized that the journey I had been on was far from over. But now, it felt different. I wasn't chasing something. I wasn't trying to prove anything. I wasn't trying to escape my past or overcome some insurmountable obstacle. I was simply living, moving forward with intention, surrounded by people who cared for me and who I cared for deeply. The company continued to thrive, but I no longer felt consumed by it. I had learned to delegate, to trust my team, and to focus on what mattered most people. I was no longer fighting for success in the way I once had. Now I was building a sustainable future, one based on values of integrity, collaboration, and empowerment. The mentorship program grew stronger, and I saw more and more young people taking the lessons they had learned and applying them to their own businesses. It wasn't about just helping them succeed, it was about teaching them how to handle setbacks, how to learn from failure, and how to stay true to their values when times got tough. I could see the ripple effect of my efforts, and it filled me with pride to know that I was helping shape the future of so many talented individuals. But what really gave me peace was the life I had started building with Sarah. Together, we found balance between our professional ambitions and our personal lives. We spent weekends traveling, exploring new places, and simply enjoying each other's company. I wasn't afraid anymore to let myself experience happiness, to focus on the things that truly mattered beyond the business world. In many ways, Sarah helped me understand what it meant to live a full life. She taught me that success wasn't just measured by accolades or financial achievements, but by the connections you built with others, the love you gave, and the way you made people feel. She reminded me of the importance of enjoying the journey, not just the destination. As we made plans for the future, I found myself thinking about the next chapter in my life. We talked about starting a family, about growing old together, and about continuing the work we were doing to help others. I knew that whatever the future held, we would face it together. And that, more than anything, was the most meaningful thing I could ever ask for. Looking back, I saw how far I had come. The man who had stood in that small apartment, watching his dreams slip away, was no longer the person I was. I had lost my job, my fiancé, and my sense of self. But I had rebuilt, learned from my failures, and created something far greater than I ever imagined. I had learned that success wasn't just about the material things you achieve. It was about the lives you touch, the lessons you impart, and the way you leave the world a little better than you found it. I had learned to embrace my failures as much as my successes, to see setbacks as opportunities for growth, and to always keep pushing forward, no matter the odds. And in the end, I realized that the true measure of success wasn't the money in the bank or the number of companies I owned. It was the people whose lives I had touched, the relationships I had built, and the difference I had made in the world. The journey had been long, filled with heartache, growth, and triumph. But it had been worth every moment. Because in the end, I had found my true purpose not in the company I had built, but in the people I had helped.